Well, this build-up of steam is just one of the challenges to deal with for Magnus Bocker, head of the Singapore Stock Exchange. I spoke with him a little earlier while he was in Sydney. Magnus Bocker, welcome to Lateline Business.
Thank you, Tikki. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we know what's in it for ASX shareholders, a pretty good price, but what's in it for the Australian local market and for investors? Because trading is a lot more expensive over Singapore, isn't it?
I think that it needs to be put into the right perspective. And when you do these kind of combination of markets, ASX will remain as a strong Australian exchange. It will continue to be locally regulated by the ASIC. It will continue to support its listed companies and its local investors. What we're trying to do is, on top of that, also to bring capital and investors from other parts of the world into Australia, to make the Australian companies more visible to those investors outside, and therefore increase the liquidity of those companies. I think there is no CEO of any listed company in Australia that don't want to have more liquidity into his stock, to have more investors into his stock.
Will it really add liquidity for Australia, though? Because we can see the attraction for Singapore, the compulsory super here. I mean, if anything, isn't a concern that the capital flows will flow out of Australia?
I think that if we look into what's going on in the world today, and especially with the strength that Australia have in the resource companies, I think there is a big demand of investors, or from investors all over the world, to invest more in resource companies. And if we can help those investors one way or the other to get more into Australia, I think it will have a very positive effect for ASX and for Australia, and therefore also for both the companies and the local investors.
Well, people mention the $100 billion worth of equity that the Australian market supplied to corporate Australia during the financial crisis. Now, how can Australian investors be confident that a similar sort of support would be delivered by a merged ASX and SGX?
I think that if we look into what the GFC created, what the financial crisis made to the rest of the world, I think we should be very pleased what we saw happening both in Australia, Singapore and the rest of Asia. I think we've been showing that we were very resilient. And what we're trying to do with this merger is to take the opportunity of the growth that we see in this part of the world, the tremendous shift from west to east. Just in 2020, less than 10 years from now, I think everybody agrees that nearly half of the world's GDP will be in this part of the world. Wouldn't that be fantastic if we can, by this combination, make us a little bit stronger, become relevant, instead of potentially become maybe irrelevant?
Well, Australia has had ambitions to be a key financial hub in the region. Is this deal really going to help? Because Australian investors and Singapore investors haven't shown much interest in each other's markets, have they?
Well, I think you maybe refer to a link that was set up, I think 6 or 7 years ago. I think it was premature at the time. I think the world of exchanges and the world financial markets have changed a lot over the last few years. So I think there is a lot of benefits that could be made between the two countries, but more importantly, into the full Asia, India, Pacific region.
Why is Singapore so attractive for Australia? If we are going to give away our ownership, wouldn't a merger with an exchange like Hong Kong or an emerging Chinese exchange be better?
I'm not sharing fully your comment about giving away. We are combining a company, the two companies coming together. It will be owned long-term by, we hope, about 30% from Australia, 30% from the rest of the world, and a little bit more than 40% from Singaporean investors. It will be a very broad ownership of the new company, and it will definitely support the financial services and Sydney becoming continuously to be an important financial centre. We share a lot of similar regulatory thinking. We share a lot of corporate governance sort of policies and standards. I think the two countries from that perspective is not too far away.
Now, you say you wouldn't have announced a deal yesterday if you weren't confident about it going through. Do you worry that our Foreign Investment Review Board might require a sell-down of some of the 23% Singapore government stake?
I will never do a forward-looking statement what I think the regulators or the different government bodies will do. We would never put this forward unless we thought it was something that is important for the financial markets in Australia and Singapore. It will be beneficial to the listed companies, to the investors in those two markets. Now we start, and we're very humble about the journey we have with our regulators, and we will work as much as we can to give them all the information and all the insight that we have about what happens in the financial markets.
We've got an unpredictable parliament here in Australia at the moment, with independents in control of some of the key decisions. Does that worry you?
I don't say it worries me. I hope that facts and the reality of where the world is going, it will always survive and will always win.
And what about regulation? The SGX is actually much smaller in size than the ASX in terms of listed companies, but your derivatives market is much bigger. Is there enough control now of these areas?
I believe that, and that is our intention with this, that ASX will remain both as a brand and as a regulated exchange here in Sydney, in Australia. Singapore Exchange will be a separate company with separate regulatory capital regulated by the MIS in Singapore. What we will do is trying to create an interoperability, as we call it, is sort of make it as easy and as seamless between the two to trade and to operate and offer more products. So it's not like the regulatory side will disappear or that the company or the brand of ASX will disappear. I would say rather the other way around.
Magnus Bocker, you've got an interesting road ahead. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you very much. A pleasure talking to you.